Hello, everybody. This is Nick Totero, Professor of Information Technologies and Computer Science, Lakeland Community College. All right, let's talk about web pen testing. As I mentioned in other videos, classroom discussions, most pen testing, ethical hacking courses have to really deal with methodology. There are so many tools out there, there are so many avenues of attack that it just becomes unwieldy if you sit there and try to teach or try to learn each individual tool. So the primary focus in these courses and these videos is to teach a methodology. So when we look at pen testing on a web server, because of the all-encompassing nature of a web server, basically covering all the bases of everything associated with information technologies, computer science, cybersecurity, you have to have some kind of methodology or it just becomes very unwieldy. And the methodology that I'm going to be discussing in this video comes from OWASP. And the best thing to do is there's a bunch of web pages and there's documents that I want to go through in this particular video. Let's go up there and let's take a look. All right, we're going to start with the OWASP methodology. First of all, OWASP, Open Worldwide Application Security Project, they're a foundation, they're an organization who is attempting through open source, free exchange of knowledge to create a methodology or a place that people can go to better understand web security, web application development, front end, back end, everything that would potentially be associated with web security. So this has turned into the go-to organization for securing web pages, web applications, whatnot. They have what do you call it? They have lists and guidelines and checklists and you name it, and they probably have it. So let's start with this particular organization. But before that, there's some newer terminology. In other videos and other sections, we've talked about common vulnerability and exploits, CVEs. Well, let's get a little definition here when it comes to web development and secure web development, and that is common weakness enumeration. This is another organization, as part of the MITRE organization, that it's a community list of potential weaknesses in hardware, firmware, services, whatever, that should be addressed before a web application, before a web server is released. And this is going to come up a lot in the methodology that we're going to cover in this particular video. So just keep CWE is different than CVE. This stands for common weakness enumeration. You're going to see this more and more. And the other thing you're going to see very quickly is how many CWEs and the almost unwieldy nature of trying to secure a web page. That's why we need that step-by-step methodology approach, because it does and can get very unwieldy. So back to the, we're going to start with what we call the top 10 awarenesses, top 10 documentation of potential web application security risk. This is a good starting point. All you basically need to do, I'm saving time by just going immediately to the web pages, do a search on OWASP top 10, and you're going to get this. This one was released in 2021. The previous one was released in 2017. They're constantly evaluating this list in the top 10 and where we see a security threat. So maybe something in 2017 was at a certain level, and maybe it's dropped down a little bit. So what are the top 10 web application security risks that are associated here? Well, the very first one is broken access control. Basically, it went in 2017, it went from 5th place now to 1st, which tells you this is something of concern. And of course, we have some links here. So let's click on the link and let's see what a broken access control is. I'm not going to go through all 10. I just want to hit some of the high points. Description. Do a little adult story hour here and read it. Access control enforces policies such as what the user cannot act or outside of their intended permission. Access control, right? We don't want users on our web pages going places or doing things they're not supposed to be doing, whether it's intentional or unintentional. What's another one? Injection. We hear this a lot with web servers. SQL injection, where these web pages are no longer providing information. We're asking it for information, which means at some point there's a dialog box where we may have to type some information and it goes out to a database. We do that routinely. Well, what we do want is if we type something there, it only goes to what we want. What we don't want is forcing it to do something it's not supposed to do, which is a form of what they call SQL injection or database injection. So these top 10 are your beginning categories, but even these are just categories. We need to break down even more. Like I said, web application development, web server security is immense. There are so many points of potential attack. So the methodology comes into play. So again, we have our top 10, what they call it, top 10 security risks, right? The big umbrellas. Well, how do we even begin this methodology? Well, one of the things they do is OWASP provides a testing guide, a web security testing guide. And this is a pretty comprehensive document. I'm going to open it up in a second. It's a pretty comprehensive document that says, for this particular criteria, these are the things you need to test for. And you're going to see, again, how immense this is. It's not a one-person job. Let's really go there. In other videos, we talked about front-end, back-end, full stack. Different people would be implementing these different tests, putting these servers through different tests to see what improvements they need to do. So let's take a look at, I've already downloaded it to save some time, and it's in a PDF file. It's readily available. Again, if you do an internet search of OWASP Web Security Testing Guide, you'll find it right away. So let's take a look at it, and here it is. And how many pages is it? 465 pages. Now, the nice thing about it is well organized. It's not a cookbook where it says, okay, do step 1, step 2, use this program. They basically give you some examples, but they break down this framework. They break down this methodology, and they say, these are the tools you can try to use to test it. And if I go back to here, the next step, again, building upon this concept of a methodology, is some kind of checklist. You're just not going to take notes. Checklist, because you're going to see how unwieldy this potentially can be. There's a lot of checklists out there. This happens to be one that you come across a great deal. I'm not advocating it. It's the one that I've seen before. It's the one that you will often see in a lot of documentations. If you do a web search on OWASP testing checklist, it's going to take you to a GitHub, and there is basically an Excel spreadsheet that you download, and that becomes your checklist. I've already downloaded it to save time. And let's go to it. And let's make it a little bit bigger so it's a little bit easier for us to read. All right, so here's this given checklist. You will notice there are down here, there's 12 different categories. Category 1, information gathering. Category 2, configuration, deployment, testing. 3, identity management. These all correlate to that testing guide, and you're going to see me go back to the testing guide in a bit. All the way over to 12, API testing, right? So you can see how really, for lack of a better word, unwieldy this can become. Maybe a very difficult task for a single individual, but you got that front end, back end, full stack developers. They would readily know, what pages they need to concentrate on. Let's go back to 1, because that's probably the easiest one. And for me, it's a little bit more comfortable for me because of my background in networking. So this first one about information gathering, we saw in other videos and classroom discussions if you took the security penetration and ethical hacking course. So This first one, and I'm going to break this down a little bit. I'm not going to be too worried. I'm going to do this second one right here. The first one, conduct a search engine discovery reconnaissance of information leak. Searching the fine web. One of the first things that is taught in an ethical hacking penetration study environment, where you're just searching the fine web. You're using Google Hacking, Shodan's a paid-for service, Recon NG, where you're just gathering and see if there's too much information out there on these search engines. So you're not touching a server yet. So let's take a look at the first one, where you're actually, as a pen tester, as an ethical hacker, where you would actually be doing something to a server, right? And it's that fingerprint the web server content. Determine the version and type of running web server to enable further discovery of any known vulnerabilities. It's one of the early things that is taught in pen testing, where you find out about the platform. You find out about the server. It's called fingerprinting, where you find out about the operating system. Operating systems have vulnerabilities in it. The older the operating system, the greater the chance that there's a vulnerability that hasn't been discovered, the older the operating system, greater the chance there's a vulnerability in it that has been discovered that can be exploited. So if an organization, or your organization, or whoever you're doing this pen testing, is running that older operating system and hasn't patched it, that's a vulnerability that needs to be addressed. Now, comes to a point where in this particular dialogue, this methodology is for the pen tester, right? You couldn't do this methodology as the ethical hacker. This methodology, this screen, these files presented in this video is for the pen tester. It is for the developers, the front end, the back end, people to make sure that before they release the web application, these are the things you're doing. So this would be a task that, doing internet searches, even though it looks like the ethical hacking approach, it is being done by the pen tester. Now, let's use this in conjunction with some of the other things we did. This is WSTG, and I'm just going to do a copy and paste here. That is, okay, WSTG, and let us go to the guide, right? The Web Security Testing Guide. And let's see what it has to say about that particular item. So I'm going to do a search. I'm just going to paste it. Give it a second. It's a big document. Make it just a little bit bigger. All right. And so here it is. Well, first of all, this is just the reference to the scenarios. Let's see if we can find it. And there it is. So here is the page on page 52 of this particular document. It says, okay, fingerprint a web server. What's it trying to do? What you're trying to identify, and even how to do a particular test. If you look, they're not really giving you a cookbook where they say, okay, step one, use this command. Now, they do tell you potential commands that you can use here. The big one would be Nmap. In a web development, you may use something called NIKTO, Nikto. We'll see those in other videos. But these are just, here is here is the directions. Here is how you test to see if what information is being responded. So if I go back to this particular checklist, okay, you can imagine none of this is going to be a couple minutes. This is going to take some time. But since a web server is our doorway, or the company's doorway into everything, it has to be taken time. The companies don't want to release web servers that are vulnerable or have some kind of weakness in it. So yes, as the pen tester, you're going to go out and conduct an internet search to see if there's been any high-end information leak that could be potentially used against you. We're going to do fingerprinting web servers with different tools. Over here, it says what tool you can use. I'm not sure where they didn't put Nmap in there, but they had WAppleizer and NIKTO. NIKTO is a pretty interesting kind of all-inclusive program. Now, this first page is really that network pen testing, the network ethical hacking approach. So several things. Again, we can go through this checklist. It's not being done by a particular individual. It's probably teams of it. And this is all done before a web server, web application is released. And again, if we were to go into some of these other ones, session management was 6, what was 7, data validation testing, a whole variety of things. And we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. But again, this is all about pen testing, that pre-release, putting a server through some kind of stress. Okay, this little intro video was really to show a methodology associated with pen testing on a web server. I'm going to keep saying this over and over in this particular section. Nowadays, a web server, web applications take everything from ITCS, information technologies and computer science, basic networking or networking in general, data analytics, database administration, web and front page, HTML code, PHP, Java, Ruby, all those programming languages, they all kind of merge into this web environment because the web has become ubiquitous. And the web is that starting point. It's that portal that everybody now goes to. We're not going to discuss it, but there is a checklist, a very similar checklist like to what you saw for web-based applications or mobile phone, smartphone applications. Think about a smartphone. Those applications, those little dedicated applications, they're using the internet. They're using all this stuff. Now, maybe they're not using a specific web page, but they have to go through the similar feature because they're just using services. Here, we're just looking at the web service. So, a lot more stuff. Let's go out and learn something.